Forest mysteries. The trail ended where the trees stopped. Hank Thorne stood at the edge of the timberline and stared up at the ridge. Gray rock and blue ice. Nothing soft. Nothing alive except the wind. He liked that. The mountain did not care why he was here. It did not ask questions about divorce papers or empty apartments. It simply waited. Behind him, the rest of the team sorted gear on the flat rock they called base camp. Finn's voice carried over the hush of the pines, rough and familiar. We lose daylight in 4 hours. If we're doing the high camp tonight, we move now. Dr. Isla Vance checked her watch. We move now. She was the leader. Everyone knew it. She spoke in commands disguised as observations. Hank found it useful. She made decisions so he did not have to. He knelt and tightened the straps on his pack. 47 pounds. He had counted everything 3 times. The routine kept his mind quiet. Food, fuel, tent, stakes, the portable weather station Alara insisted on. His own tools, hammer, lenses, sample bags. Geology did not care about his marriage either. Rocks did not lie. Rocks did not leave. Jasper came up beside him, breath fogging. You think we'll see them? See what? The wolves. Finn says there's a pack that hunts these ridges. The young biologist smiled. He was 24 and still believed in things. I'm here for rock samples, Hank said. Right? Of course. Alara joined them, pulling a glove off to check the small barometer clipped to her jacket. Pressure's holding steady. High altitude system. We should have clear skies for the next 36 hours. She said it like a fact, but her eyes stayed on the western horizon, where a thin band of cloud was building. Hank noticed. He did not mention it. They climbed. The first 1,000 feet were the worst. Loose scree that slid under every step. Hank leaned into the slope and let his legs burn. Pain was simple. Pain made sense. Behind him, Jasper's breathing grew ragged, and Finn dropped back to pace him. Isla led without looking back. Alara stopped every few hundred feet to check the barometer again. At 2,000 feet, the wind began. It came from the west, steady and cold. Alara pulled her hood up and raised her voice. The system is moving faster than I thought. We should consider. We are on schedule, Isla said. High camp is another 1,000 feet. We make it. We have shelter. Hank watched Alara's face. She wanted to argue, but she only nodded. They pushed on. The light changed. The gray of the rock deepened to something bruised. The wind began to gust, and with each gust came a low sound. Not a howl yet, but a vibration Hank felt in his chest. He had been in mountains before. He knew the difference between weather and a warning. At 3,000 feet, they found the shelf, a flat space of stone sheltered by a massive overhang. Isla called it perfect. She was already marking spots for the tents. Alara held the barometer close to her face. It's dropping. Fast. This is not normal. Set the tents, Isla said. We ride it out. Finn was already driving stakes into a crack in the stone. Hank moved to help him. The wind screamed now, full-throated, and the first snow came sideways, hard as sand. They got the first tent up. Hank was securing the fly when he saw them. 3 shapes, gray against gray, low to the ground, moving along the edge of the shelf. Wolves. Their fur was thick, their ribs showing. They did not look at the humans. They moved toward the deep shelter of the overhang, where the wind was less. Finn, Hank said. Finn turned. His hand went to the knife on his belt. They're just looking for cover. They're coming in. The largest wolf, a gray alpha with a torn ear, stopped at the edge of the overhang. It turned its head. For one moment, its eyes met Hank's. Then it moved into the shelter and lay down. Hank did not move. He felt his own heart beating. The wolf was 20 feet away. It did not snarl. It simply closed its eyes and let the storm rage past. The second tent went up in near darkness. The wind was constant now, a living thing trying to peel the fabric from the poles. Hank worked by touch, by instinct. When he looked again, the wolves had gathered under the overhang. 5 of them, curled together, their breath making small clouds in the cold. The temperature was dropping. He could feel it through his gloves, through his jacket. His fingers were numb. Inside, Isla shouted. He grabbed his pack and crawled into the tent. The others were already there, pressed together in the dark. The fabric shuddered. The poles groaned. Hank unzipped the door a few inches and looked out. The wolves had moved closer. They were now against the same rock that sheltered the tents. The alpha opened one eye. It did not move. The barometer Alara had clipped inside the tent showed a number Hank had never seen in the field. He did not need to be a climatologist to understand what it meant. How long? He asked. Alara shook her head. I don't know. The storm screamed outside. The wolves did not move, and Hank sat in the dark, watching the barometer fall, feeling something shift in his chest, something that was not fear, not yet, but the quiet recognition that the mountain was no longer just waiting. The first hour was the hardest. Hank lay in the tent with his knees pulled to his chest, listening to the fabric hammer itself against the poles. The wind had a voice now, not a howl but a deep, throaty roar that made the rock beneath him vibrate. Every few minutes a gust would slam the far wall of the tent against Alara's shoulder, and she would push back without a word. Jasper was curled between them, his breathing fast and shallow. Finn lay nearest the door, one hand on the zipper, ready to cut his way out if the tent collapsed. Isla's voice came through the wall from the second tent. Everyone hold positions. We ride it out. Hank did not answer. He was watching the gap, where the door zipper had failed to seal completely. A thin line of snow had begun to creep across the floor. He reached out and swept it back with his glove. The motion was automatic, useless. The snow kept coming. Temperatures still dropping, Alara said. She had the barometer pressed between her thighs, sheltering it from the cold. We're at -22. If this tent goes. It won't go, Finn said. Hank looked at the pole above his head. It was bowed in a curve that did not look like engineering. It looked like exhaustion. The second hour became the third. The wind did not stop. The snow built a wall against the outside of the tent, burying the fly, muffling the roar, but not the cold. Hank's feet had gone numb. He moved his toes inside his boots, felt nothing, and told himself the feeling would return when the storm passed. He did not believe it. Jasper spoke. His voice was thin. Do you think the wolves are still out there? Hank thought of the gray alpha with the torn ear. He thought of the way it had looked at him before closing its eyes. Yes. They're going to freeze. They've survived worse, Finn said. They know these mountains. But Finn's hand had not left the zipper. Alara shifted, pressing her side against Hank. The shared warmth was the only warmth. He felt her shivering and put his arm around her shoulders. She did not pull away. This close, he could smell the wool of her jacket and something else, the sharp, clean scent of cold that had worked its way into her skin. We should have turned back, she said quietly. Isla made the call. We all made it. We voted. Hank had no answer for that. He had voted to push on because turning back meant returning to the apartment, to the silence, to the papers he had signed 3 months ago that made the silence legal. The mountain had seemed simpler then. In the fourth hour, the tent began to fail. It started with a sound like tearing paper. Hank looked up and saw a seam near the peak splitting open, thread by thread. Snow poured through in a fine white dust. Finn moved instantly, jamming a glove into the gap, but the pressure was too much. The split ran another 6 inches. We're losing it, Finn said. We have to get out. Into what? Isla's voice came sharp from the other tent. Stay where you are. The tent is coming apart. Hank moved before he decided. He unzipped the door and pushed into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall. Snow filled his eyes, his mouth, the collar of his jacket. He dropped to his knees and crawled. The rock was slick with ice. He went forward because going back was not an option. His hands found the overhang, the same rock the wolves had used. He pulled himself under it. The wolves were there, all 5 of them, pressed into the deepest part of the hollow. The alpha raised its head. Its eyes were yellow, unblinking. Hank did not move. He knelt in the snow 3 feet from the pack and felt the wind trying to pull him back into the dark. The alpha made a sound, not a growl, a low exhalation, almost human. Then it lowered its head to its paws and closed its eyes. Hank turned and shouted into the wind. Here, under the rock. He did not know if they heard him. He crawled back to the collapsing tent, grabbed Jasper's arm, and pulled. Jasper came out stumbling, his face white with cold. Finn followed with the gear bag. Alara came last, dragging the weather station. Isla's team emerged from their tent, and for a few minutes there was chaos, bodies colliding, voices lost in the roar, hands grabbing hands. They made it to the hollow. The wolves did not move. The humans pressed themselves against the rock, and the rock held. The overhang was deep enough to break the wind, and the wolves' bodies had already warmed the space. Hank felt the difference the moment he sat down. The air was still, almost calm. Jasper was the first to notice. They're letting us stay. Finn shook his head. They're trapped here, same as us. But Hank was watching the alpha. It had opened its eyes again and was watching him. There was no fear in its gaze, no aggression, just a steady, ancient patience. The hours passed. They sat with their backs to the rock, their knees almost touching the wolf's fur. Jasper fell asleep leaning against Finn. Alara checked the barometer every hour and announced the numbers in a voice that grew steadier as the pressure held. Isla did not speak. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, her face turned away from the pack. Hank did not sleep. He sat with his back against the cold stone and watched the alpha's side rise and fall. At some point, he realized the wolf's breathing had synchronized with his own. In, out, in, out. The rhythm filled the hollow, filled his chest. He felt the cold recede, not gone but pushed back, made bearable by the simple fact of another living heart beating beside him. He thought of his wife, not the last argument, not the signed papers, but the way she used to breathe beside him in the dark before everything went wrong. He had not thought of that in months. The memory did not hurt. It just was. The wind began to die in the 7th hour. The roars softened to a moan, then to a whisper. Gray light seeped into the hollow, showing faces pale with exhaustion, showing the wolves one by one rising to their feet. The alpha stood. It looked at Hank. Then it turned and walked out into the fading storm. The others followed. They did not look back. Jasper let out a long breath. They're gone. Hank did not answer. He was looking at the space where the alpha had lain. The snow was melted in the shape of its body. A few gray hairs clung to the rock. Finn stood and stretched. We need to check the camp. See what we can salvage. They found nothing. The tents were gone, shredded by the wind, the pieces buried under 3 feet of snow. The food was lost. The communication gear, satellite phone, radio, GPS, was gone with them. Isla stood in the wreckage, her face unreadable. We're stranded. Alara was already calculating. 5 days of rations if we ration from the start. Less now. Finn kicked at a twisted tent pole. We need to move. Lower altitude. There's a trailhead 30 miles down the east ridge. Hank walked to the edge of the shelf and looked down. The valley was white, featureless, sealed off from the world. He turned back to the hollow. The wolves' tracks led west, away from the ridge, toward the deeper peaks. Alara came up beside him. What are you thinking? He did not answer. He was watching the tracks, watching the wind erase them, and feeling the rhythm of the alpha's breathing still moving in his chest. The light took another hour to fully arrive, and with it came the full weight of what they had lost. Hank walked the perimeter of the ruined camp while the others stood in the hollow, saying nothing. The first tent had become a rag of fabric tangled around a splintered pole, frozen into the snow so deeply that digging it out would cost more energy than the fabric was worth. The second tent was gone entirely, blown off the shelf, its stakes torn from the rock, leaving only a single guy lying whipping in the dying wind. He found the food cache where Finn had buried it between two boulders, but the wind had packed snow into every crevice, and when he dug down with his hands, the bags were soaked through. The freeze-dried meals turned to blocks of ice wrapped in torn plastic. He carried what he could back to the hollow. 3 protein bars that had been in his jacket pocket, 1 bag of dried meat that had been at the bottom of Finn's pack, a metal cup, a lighter that still sparked when he flicked it. Finn was doing the same on the other side of the shelf, digging through the debris with the methodical patience of a man who had lost gear before. He came back with a coil of rope, a bent cooking pot, and the axe. Isla sat on a rock near the hollow's entrance with her pack across her knees, emptying it piece by piece. Jasper stood apart, staring at the tracks the wolves had left, his breath fogging in the cold air. Alara was the one who found the satellite phone. It had been in Isla's pack, wrapped in a fleece jacket and tucked against the back panel. When Alara held it up, Hank saw the screen was cracked and the casing was bent. She pressed the power button anyway. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, held it down, and the screen flickered once. A weak green light that showed no signal bars, no battery indicator, just a flat line of static, before it went dark again. "It's dead," she said. "The battery might be salvageable if we could warm it, but the antenna is snapped. There's no signal up here even if it worked." Isla took the phone from her hands and turned it over once, slowly, as if confirming a death. Then she set it down on the rock beside her. "GPS." "Gone," Finn said. "It was in the tent with me. I couldn't find it in the wreckage." "Maps." "I have the topo," Hank said. He pulled the folded map from the inner pocket of his jacket, where he had kept it against his chest through the night. The paper was damp at the edges, but intact. He spread it on the flat rock, weighting the corners with stones. They gathered around it. Hank found their position with his finger, the high shelf at 3,000 meters, marked by a contour line that circled the peak like a closed fist. Below them, the east ridge dropped to the tree line, then to a valley with a trail marked in dotted red. 30 miles, give or take. 2 days in good weather. More in snow. Finn traced the route with his thumb. "We follow the ridge down to the tree line, then cut east to the trail. There's a ranger station at the trailhead. If it's manned, they have a radio. If it's not, we follow the trail another 10 miles to the road." 30 miles, Jasper said. His voice was quiet. "With what food?" Hank laid out what he had found. 3 protein bars. 1 bag of dried meat, maybe half a pound. The bent cooking pot. The lighter. Finn added half a sleeve of crackers from his pack, crushed to crumbs, but edible. Alara had a small bag of nuts and a chocolate bar she had been saving. Isla had 2 meal bars and a flask of water that had not frozen solid because she had kept it inside her jacket. They laid everything on the rock and looked at it. Hank counted in his head. If they rationed carefully, stretching each portion across the day, they had food for perhaps 3 days. For if they did not move. But moving burned calories, and the cold burned them faster. "We need to hunt," Jasper said. "Or forage. There are edible roots below the tree line. Small game, maybe." Isla shook her head. "We don't have time. Every day we stay up here, the weather gets worse. Another storm comes. We don't have shelter. We move today." "Move with what?" Finn asked. "We have 1 tent between 5 people. 1 pot. 1 axe. No sleeping bags. Mine are buried under 3 feet of snow, and I'm not digging for them when we don't know where they landed." "Then we share the tent," Isla said. "We take turns walking. We don't stop long enough to freeze." Alara was looking at the map again. Her finger traced a different line, west of the ridge, away from the trail, into the higher peaks where the wolves had gone. There's another route, she said quietly. An old mining track. It cuts through a pass and comes out closer to the road. Shorter distance. It's also closed for the season, Finn said. The pass is above 4,000 meters. We'd be climbing, not descending. The wolves went that way, Jasper said. They all looked at him. He flushed but did not look away. They know these mountains. They survived the storm. They know where shelter is. They're wolves, Isla said. They have fur and they hunt with their teeth. We have neither. Hank said nothing. He was looking at the map, at the empty space west of the ridge where no trails were marked, where the contour lines crowded together like the folds of a closed fist. He thought of the alpha's yellow eyes watching him in the dark. He thought of the rhythm of its breathing, steady and patient, as if it had known the storm would end. We go east, Isla said. She folded the map before anyone could argue. We leave in 30 minutes. Take only what we can carry. They packed in silence. Hank took the axe and the rope, the lighter and the cup. He folded the map into his jacket again, close to his chest. While the others sorted through the debris one last time, he walked to the edge of the shelf and looked west. The wolves' tracks were gone now, erased by wind and fresh snow. But he knew the direction. He could feel it in his chest, the same way he had felt the alpha's heartbeat against his ribs through the long hours of the storm. Behind him, Finn called out, "Hank, we're moving." He turned and walked back to the hollow. Alara was waiting for him, her pack slung over one shoulder, her face tight with cold and exhaustion. She looked at him and tilted her head toward the west ridge. "You think we're going the wrong way?" she said. It was not a question. Hank picked up his pack. "I think the wolves survived the storm. That's all." But as he followed the others down the east ridge, he kept looking back. The hollow was empty now, the snow already filling the space where they had huddled together. He walked with his head down, counting steps, trying to match the rhythm of his breathing to something he could no longer hear. The descent took longer than any of them expected. Hank followed Finn down the east ridge with the map folded in his pocket and the axe strapped across his pack. The snow was deep but crusted, holding his weight for 2 steps before breaking through to his knees. Each stride became a calculation. Lean forward, shift weight, lift, step, sink, repeat. After the first hour, his thighs were burning. After the second, he stopped feeling them altogether. Alara walked behind him. He could hear her breathing, steady but forced, and the occasional scrape of her pack against the rock face when the trail narrowed. Jasper came next, and Isla brought up the rear. She had insisted on being last, and Hank understood why. She was watching them, measuring their pace, calculating how long before one of them broke. The wolves appeared in the 3rd hour. Hank saw them first, 3 shapes moving along the ridge above them, 200 meters east, keeping pace without seeming to try. Their fur was dark against the snow, their bodies low and fluid. The alpha was not among them. These were younger, smaller, their movements quicker. "They're following us," Jasper said. There was wonder in his voice, not fear. "They're scavengers," Finn said without looking up. "They're waiting for one of us to fall." But Hank did not think that was true. The wolves kept their distance. They did not circle or test. They simply moved parallel to the humans, pausing when the group paused, moving when the group moved. It felt like watching, not hunting. The ridge began to narrow in the 4th hour. The snow gave way to exposed rock, slick with ice, and they moved one by one along a path no wider than Hank's shoulders. To the left, the mountain fell away into a bowl of scree and shadow. To the right, the rock wall rose sheer and unbroken. He kept his hand on the stone and did not look down. When they stopped to rest, the wolves stopped too. They sat on a spur of rock above the trail, 3 gray shapes silhouetted against the white sky. One of them yawned. Another lay down with its head on its paws. They looked patient. They looked like they were waiting for something. "This is wrong," Alara said quietly. She had moved up beside Hank while Finn checked the rope. "Wolves don't behave like this. Not around people. Not without reason." "Maybe they remember last night," Hank said. "Maybe." She looked at him. Her face was pinched with cold, but her eyes were clear. "Or maybe they're following something else, and we just happen to be in the same direction." Hank did not answer. He was looking at the ridge above them, where the light was beginning to shift. The clouds had thinned in the last hour, and the sun was a pale disk behind them, casting everything in shades of gray and blue. In that light, the shadows looked deeper than they should. The crevices between rocks looked like open mouths. They moved on. By the 5th hour, the light was fading. Finn called a halt on a flat shelf below a rock overhang. A poor shelter, but the best they would find before dark. They set the single tent against the rock face, staking it with ice screws Finn had salvaged from the wreckage. The tent was designed for 2 people. 5 would fit if they lay like spoons and did not move. They would fit. They had no choice. While the others worked, Hank climbed to the ridge above the camp. He told himself he was looking for a better route. The map showed a fork in the trail another mile east, one branch dropping to the valley, the other climbing toward a pass he had not noticed before. He wanted to see the terrain with his own eyes. That was what he told himself. The wolves were gone. Their tracks led east along the ridge, then veered south, down a slope Hank had not seen from below. He followed the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared into a stand of twisted pines. Something about the way the trees grew, leaning away from the slope, their branches bent and broken, made him stop. The ground at his feet was disturbed. He knelt. The snow was churned here, not by wolves. Boot prints, large, with a tread pattern he did not recognize. He counted 3 sets, maybe 4, overlapping and leading back toward the pines. They were fresh. The edges of the prints were still sharp, not yet softened by wind. He stood up slowly. The feeling came from nowhere and everywhere, the sensation of being watched. Not by wolves, by something else. He turned in a slow circle, his hand finding the axe handle without thinking. The ridge was empty. The slope below was empty. The pines stood silent, their branches heavy with snow. He waited. The wind picked up, carrying a sound he could not name. Not a howl, not a voice. Something lower, deeper, like a breath held too long. He went back to camp. Finn was stacking rocks for a windbreak. Jasper was inside the tent, arranging packs to make space. Isla stood apart, watching the eastern sky. Alara was at the edge of the shelf, looking down at something in the snow. She looked up when Hank approached. Her face was white. "Come look at this," she said. He followed her gaze. Below the shelf, 20 feet down the slope, an animal lay in the snow. A mountain goat, its legs splayed, its body torn open. The wounds were not from wolves. They were too large, too deep, the edges ragged in a way that spoke of something blunt and heavy. Finn came up behind them. He looked at the carcass, then at the ridge above, then back at the carcass. His hand went to the knife on his belt. "Those tracks you saw," he said quietly. "How many?" 3, maybe 4. Finn nodded slowly. He pointed to the ground next to the goat. In the snow, beside the carcass, was a print. Not a boot. Larger. Wider. The impression showed 5 distinct shapes. Too long for toes. Too thick for fingers. "We're not alone up here," Finn said. Isla walked to the edge of the shelf. She looked at the carcass, at the print, at the dark line of pines where the tracks led. Her face did not change. "We keep moving," she said. "Tomorrow. First light." Isla, Alara started. "First light. We don't stop again until we reach the tree line." Hank looked at the pines. The light was almost gone now, the shadows pooling in the spaces between the trees. He thought of the wolves, watching from the ridge, watching something else. He thought of the alpha's yellow eyes, patient and ancient, as if it had known all along what was waiting in the dark. He put his hand on the axe and waited for morning. The argument came at dawn, and it came without warning. Hank woke to the sound of voices outside the tent, low and sharp. He crawled out into gray light and found Isla and Finn standing over the map, their breath clouding between them. Alara stood to one side with her arms crossed. Jasper was still inside the tent, but his face appeared at the flap, watching. "We go east," Isla was saying. Her voice was calm, but her jaw was set. That was the decision. The decision was before we knew something else was out there. Finn pointed to the carcass below the shelf, now half buried in fresh snow. "Whoever left those tracks, they're not heading east. They went south, toward the pass. Which is why we go east. Away from them. Away from shelter," Alara said quietly. "Away from the pass that cuts 30 miles off our route." Isla turned on her. "You don't know what's in that pass. Neither do I. But I know what's on the East Ridge. A trail, a ranger station, a road. Those are things we can trust." "We trusted the weather forecast," Finn said. "We trusted the tents. We trusted the satellite phone. None of those things are working." The silence that followed was heavy. Hank watched Isla's face. She was not used to being questioned. She was the leader. She had the grants, the credentials, the experience. But experience did not matter here. Nothing mattered except the next step, and no one agreed on what it should be. "What do you think?" Alara asked. She was looking at Hank. They all were. He looked at the map. East Ridge, Ranger Station, 30 miles. South Pass, shorter distance. Unknown terrain, unknown threat. He thought of the wolves, moving west, away from the ridge. He thought of the Alpha's eyes, patient and certain. "I think we should see the pass," he said. "Scout it. If it's closed, we go east. If it's open, we save 2 days." "We don't have 2 days to waste scouting," Isla said. "We don't have 2 days to waste walking the long way if there's a shorter route." The argument went on for another hour. Voices rose and fell. Finn paced the edge of the shelf, kicking at stones. Jasper sat in the tent opening, saying nothing, his eyes moving between them like a man watching a storm approach. In the end, they split. Isla would go east with Finn. She said it was the only logical route. She said anyone who chose to go south was making a mistake based on fear and superstition. She said it with her chin raised and her hands on her hips, and Hank saw something in her face that he had not noticed before. Not confidence, but desperation. She needed to be right. She needed the mountain to obey her. Finn went with her out of duty. Hank saw it in the way he packed his bag, the way he did not argue when Isla told him to carry the tent. Finn did not believe the East Ridge was the right choice, but he believed in staying together, and when staying together became impossible, he chose the person who had hired him. Alara chose Hank. Jasper chose Hank. They divided the gear. Isla took the tent and the cooking pot. Finn took the rope and most of the food. Hank kept the axe, the map, the lighter, and 1 protein bar for each of them. When they stood on the edge of the shelf, ready to go separate ways, Isla looked at Hank with an expression he could not read. 2 days, she said. "If you're not at the ranger station in 2 days, I'm sending help." "If you're not there in 2 days," Hank said, "I'm coming to find you." She nodded once, sharply, and turned away. The south route began immediately with a climb. Hank led them up the ridge face, using the axe to clear holds in the ice. Alara followed, then Jasper. The wind was lighter here, blocked by the peak, but the air was thinner. Every 20 steps, they stopped to breathe. Every 50 steps, Hank checked the map, though the route was simple enough. Follow the ridge until it dropped to the pass, then follow the pass down. They found the wolves again at midday. The pack was waiting on a spur of rock above the trail. 5 of them now, including the gray alpha. They did not move when the humans approached. They simply watched, their breath misting in the cold air, their fur ruffled by the wind. "They're guiding us," Jasper said. He was breathing hard, but there was excitement in his voice. They want us to follow. Or they want whatever's behind us to follow us, Alara said. But she did not slow down. The pass opened before them in the early afternoon. It was not a pass in the usual sense, not a gentle valley between peaks, but a wound in the mountain, a cleft of black rock that cut deep into the ridge. The wolves entered it without hesitation. Hank followed. The walls rose on either side, blocking the wind, blocking the light. The snow here was different, softer, deeper, untouched by the sun. They moved through it in single file, their breath echoing off the rock. The silence was complete. No wind, no birds, just the crunch of their boots and the distant scrape of stone somewhere ahead. Jasper stopped first. "Do you hear that?" Hank listened. At first there was nothing. Then, very faint, a sound. Low, rhythmic, a pulse, almost, like something breathing far below them. Alara's face was white. "What is that?" "The mountain," Jasper whispered. It's like a heartbeat." Hank looked at the rock walls, at the deep cracks that ran through them like veins. He put his hand on the stone. It was warm. Not warm like sun-warmed rock, but warm like skin, like flesh. The wolves were waiting at the far end of the pass, their shapes dark against the white slope beyond. The alpha turned its head and looked back at him. Its mouth was open, its tongue pale, its eyes fixed on something behind them. Hank turned. At the entrance to the pass, where the light was thin and the shadows pooled, something moved. It was too tall to be a man, too broad. It stood at the edge of the light and did not step forward. It only watched. "Run," Hank said. They ran. They ran until the pass narrowed to a throat of black stone, and then they ran until the stone opened into a bowl ringed by cliffs. The wolves had vanished. Hank stopped with his hands on his knees, his lungs burning, the axe still gripped in his right hand. Alara collapsed against a boulder. Jasper stood in the center of the bowl, turning in a slow circle, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Where did they go?" Jasper asked. Hank looked up. The walls of the bowl rose 40 feet on all sides, sheer and unbroken except for a single crack near the far end. The snow was undisturbed except for their own tracks. The wolves had simply disappeared. "They know this place," Alara said. She was staring at the crack. "They went in there." "Then we follow them," Hank said. But before they could move, the shadows at the entrance of the bowl shifted. 3 figures emerged from the pass. They moved with a heavy, loping gait, their arms hanging low, their heads hunched between their shoulders. They wore skins, animal hides stitched together with sinew, stained dark with grease and dirt. Their faces were thick with hair and scar tissue, their eyes small and pale in the gray light. One of them carried a length of pipe wrapped in wire. Another dragged a piece of chain that clinked against the stones. Hank raised the axe. "Stay behind me." The figures stopped 20 feet away. The tallest one, a man, Hank realized, though the proportions were wrong, the shoulders too wide, the neck too thick, stepped forward. He made a sound. Not words exactly. A series of clicks and grunts that seemed to mean something to the others. They spread out, blocking the exits. "We don't want trouble," Hank said. His voice sounded thin in the open air. "We're just passing through." The tall man tilted his head. His eyes moved from Hank to Alara to Jasper, and then back to Hank. He pointed at the axe. He made another sound, sharper this time. Hank did not lower the weapon. The attack came without warning. One of the smaller figures lunged at Jasper, grabbing his pack and pulling him to the ground. Hank swung the axe, but the tall man caught his arm with a grip that felt like iron. The chain wrapped around his wrist and yanked. He fell, his face hitting the snow, and then there was weight on his back, pressing him down. He heard Alara scream. He heard Jasper shout something that turned into a choked cry. By the time he forced his head up, They had Jasper pinned against the rock wall, the tall man holding him by the collar while another pressed a blade, a shard of rusted metal, against his throat. Hank tried to rise. The chain tightened, cutting into his wrist. The tall man looked at him. Then he looked at Alara, who was kneeling in the snow with her hands bound behind her back. He studied her face, her hair, the shape of her body beneath her jacket. He made the clicking sound again, slower this time. His lips pulled back from teeth that had been filed to points. One of the others spoke. A single word, almost recognizable. Bride. The tall man nodded. He pointed at Jasper, then made a cutting motion across his own throat. Then he pointed at Alara, and he pointed at himself. Hank understood. He looked at Jasper's face, white with fear, the blade pressed against his skin. He looked at Alara, who was staring at the tall man with an expression that was not fear, but something colder. Calculation, maybe, or acceptance. He looked at the axe, buried in the snow 3 feet away, the chain wrapped around his wrist, the 3 figures who could kill them all before he could even stand. Don't, Alara said. Her voice was steady. Hank, don't. The tall man waited. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, like stones worn smooth by water. There was nothing in them. No anger, no cruelty, no anything. He was waiting for an answer the way a wolf waits for a rabbit to tire. Patient, certain, empty. Hank thought of the alpha. He thought of the heartbeat in the rock, the warmth beneath his palm. He thought of the rhythm of the wolf's breathing, in and out, steady and patient. He had learned something in that hollow. Something about survival. Something about what it meant to be part of a pack. He shook his head. The tall man frowned. He pressed the blade harder against Jasper's throat, and a thin line of blood appeared. Hank shook his head again. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply waited, his eyes locked on the tall man's face, and he let something else rise up inside him. Not fear, not rage. Something older. Something that had been waiting in the hollow of his chest since the night of the storm. The tall man's frown deepened. He made a sound, not a click this time, but a low growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. He released Jasper and took a step toward Hank. Behind him, from the crack in the far wall, a sound emerged. Not the heartbeat this time. A growl. Low, long, unmistakable. The gray alpha stepped out of the crack, followed by the rest of the pack. They moved slowly, their shoulders low, their teeth bared. The alpha's eyes were fixed on the tall man. The stalkers turned. The one with the chain raised it. The one with the pipe swung it in a wide arc. But the wolves did not stop. They spread out, forming a half circle around the humans, their growls rising to a chorus that echoed off the stone walls. The tall man looked at Hank. For the first time, something moved behind his pale eyes. Not fear, recognition. He made a sharp sound to his companions. They backed away, dragging Jasper with them for a moment before releasing him. The tall man pointed at Hank, then at the wolves. He made a gesture, a hand pressed flat against his chest, then extended toward the alpha, and then he turned and disappeared into the pass. The others followed. Hank lay in the snow, the chain still wrapped around his wrist, and listened to the sound of their footsteps fade. The wolves did not pursue. The alpha walked to Hank, sniffed the chain, and then sat down beside him, its flank pressed against his shoulder. Jasper was crying. Alara was already working at the bindings on her wrists with her teeth. Hank did not move. He lay with his face in the snow, the wolf's warmth seeping through his jacket, and he let the rhythm of its breathing fill him again. The fight did not come all at once. It came in pieces. Hank freed his wrist from the chain while Alara worked on Jasper's throat. The cut was shallow, more blood than damage, but Jasper sat shaking with his hand pressed to his neck. The wolves had not left. They stood in a loose circle around the humans, their heads low, their ears flat. The alpha watched the crack in the wall where the stalkers had gone. They'll come back, Alara said. Hank knew she was right. The tall man's eyes had held no surrender, only retreat. He picked up the axe and tested the edge against his thumb. Still sharp. He looked at the crack in the far wall. We go in. We find a way through. Into the mountain? Jasper's voice cracked. The wolves know the way. He did not wait for an answer. He walked toward the crack, and the wolves moved with him. After a moment, he heard footsteps behind him. Elara first, then Jasper. The crack opened into a tunnel. Not a cave, something made. The walls were smooth in some places, rough in others, as if they had been worked and then abandoned. The air was warm, not the warmth of sun on stone, but a deep, rising heat that came from somewhere below. Hank felt it in his boots first, then in his chest. The heartbeat sound was louder here, a pulse that vibrated through the rock. The stalkers were waiting in the first chamber. The tunnel widened into a space the size of a small room. Bones were scattered across the floor, animal bones, mostly, but Hank saw something that might have been a human rib cage near the far wall. The stalkers stood in the shadows, 3 of them, their pale eyes catching the weak light that filtered through the crack behind them. The tall man stepped forward. He was holding a blade now, a piece of metal sharpened to a rough edge. He made the clicking sound again, faster this time, and the others spread out. The alpha growled. Hank did not think. He moved. The axe came up and came down in the same motion, catching the closest stalker across the shoulder. The man screamed, a high, animal sound, and fell. The second stalker lunged at Hank with a length of pipe, but the alpha was there first, teeth sinking into the man's arm. The pipe clattered to the stone. The tall man came at Hank with the blade. Hank swung the axe again, but the tall man was faster. He ducked under the swing and drove his shoulder into Hank's chest. They went down together, the blade scraping against the axe handle, the chain still wrapped around Hank's wrist catching on the tall man's arm. They rolled across the bone-strewn floor, each trying to find leverage, each breathing in the other's face. Hank smelled him. Grease. Blood. Something older, deeper, like the smell of a wound that never healed. The tall man's weight was immense. He pinned Hank's axe arm with one hand and raised the blade with the other. Hank saw his own face reflected in the dull metal, and he saw something else behind his eyes. Not fear, not rage, but the same empty patience he had seen in the stalker's gaze. He reached up with his free hand and grabbed the tall man's wrist. The blade stopped an inch from his throat. They held there, locked, the muscles in Hank's arm burning, the stalker's strength grinding him into the stone. The alpha's jaws closed on the tall man's leg. The man screamed. His grip loosened. Hank drove the axe up with both hands. The blade caught the tall man under the chin and kept going. There was a sound like a branch breaking. Then the weight was gone, and Hank was lying on his back, breathing hard, the axe still in his hands, the blade wet. He had killed a man. The realization came slowly, like water seeping through a crack. He looked at the tall man's face, at the pale eyes now open and still, at the blood pooling on the stone. He felt nothing. Not guilt, not relief, just a hollow quiet where something had been. Elara was calling his name. He turned. The second stalker was on the ground, the alpha standing over him, blood on its muzzle. Jasper was pressing his jacket against Elara's side. There was blood there too much of it. The third stalker was gone, disappeared into a deeper tunnel at the back of the chamber. He stabbed her, Jasper said. His voice was high, thin. When the wolf let go, he stabbed her. Hank crawled to Elara. She was conscious, her face white, her teeth clenched. He pulled Jasper's hands away and looked at the wound. A puncture below the ribs. Deep. He pressed his own jacket against it and felt her blood soak through to his fingers. We need to get her out, he said. Elara shook her head. Her eyes were bright, focused. Not yet. The others. Isla and Finn. The stalker went that way. He'll find them. Hank looked at the deeper tunnel. The darkness there was absolute. He could hear nothing but the heartbeat pulse of the mountain. The Alpha walked to the tunnel entrance. It looked back at him. Once. Twice. Then it disappeared into the dark. Go, Alaris said. Hank stood. He left the axe beside her. She could not hold it, but he wanted her to have something. He took the stalker's blade instead. It was crude, heavy, but it would cut. He looked at Jasper. Keep pressure on the wound. Do not let up. He walked into the dark. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew warmer, thicker. He moved by touch, one hand on the wall, the blade in the other. The heartbeat was loud now, a rhythm that seemed to come from the stone itself. He followed it, followed the smell of blood and smoke that hung in the air, followed the faint sounds of struggle ahead. He found them in a second chamber, smaller than the first. Finn was on his knees, his hands bound, his face swollen. Isla lay against the far wall, her eyes open, her chest still. The third stalker stood over Finn with a piece of wire wrapped around his fists, ready to tighten it. Hank did not pause. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides and drove the blade into the stalker's back. The man arched, dropped the wire, and fell. Finn looked up. His eyes were wide, his mouth open. He did not speak. He could not speak. Something had been taken from him in the dark. Hank cut his bonds. He knelt beside Isla. Her eyes were glassy, her skin already cold. There was a wound in her chest, deep and ragged. The gunshot they had heard days ago. She had been dead for hours. He looked at Finn. Finn shook his head once, slowly, and Hank understood. They had not found help. They had found the stalkers first. We're leaving, Hank said. Now. He pulled Finn to his feet and led him back through the tunnel. The Alpha met them halfway, its fur dark with blood, one ear torn. It turned and walked beside Hank, matching his pace, as they made their way back to the chamber where Alara waited. The way down was longer than the way up had ever been. Hank led them out of the tunnel and into the gray light of the bowl. The snow had begun to fall again, not the screaming violence of the first storm, but a steady, patient fall that blurred the edges of the rocks and filled their tracks before they could leave them. Alara walked with her arm around Jasper's shoulders, her free hand pressed against the wound in her side. The bleeding had slowed, but the fabric of her jacket was stiff with dried blood, and her face had the waxy pallor of someone who was losing more than she was taking in. Finn walked behind them. He had not spoken since Hank found him in the tunnel. His eyes were open, and he followed when they moved, but something behind his eyes had closed. Hank watched him stumble over a rock, catch himself, and keep walking without changing expression. The wolves flanked them on both sides, moving in the same direction without hurry. The Alpha stayed beside Hank. It favored one leg now, a gash across the thigh that Hank had not noticed in the dark. Blood matted its fur, but it did not slow. It matched his pace step for step, its shoulder occasionally brushing against his leg, and Hank found himself leaning into that contact without thinking. They crossed the pass in silence. The heartbeat sound had faded behind them, swallowed by the falling snow and the distance. Now there was only the crunch of boots, the soft pad of wolf paws, the rasp of breath in thin air. Jasper was the first to break the quiet. We should rest. Hank looked at Alara. She shook her head. Keep moving. You're bleeding again. I'll bleed slower if we're lower. She was right. They kept moving. The pass began to widen as the walls fell away. The terrain shifted from stone to scree to the first scattered pines, their branches bent under the weight of snow. The tree line was close. Hank could feel it in the air, the wind less sharp, the cold less eager to find the gaps in his clothing. He counted steps. 500. 1,000. Each step brought them closer to the valley, to the trail, to the world where people called for help on radios and waited in warm rooms for rescue. But each step also pulled him away from the hollow, from the rhythm of the Alpha's breathing, from something he had found in the dark that he did not have words for. They stopped at the edge of the tree line because Alara's legs gave out. She went down without a sound, her knees folding beneath her, her hand slipping from Jasper's shoulder. Hank caught her before she hit the snow. She was lighter than she should have been, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. He lowered her against the trunk of a pine and pressed his palm against the wound. The fabric was wet again. "We need to build a fire," he said. Finn was already moving, gathering dead branches from under the snow with mechanical efficiency. Jasper knelt beside Alara, pulling off his jacket to wrap around her shoulders. The wolves had stopped at the edge of the clearing. They stood in a loose cluster, watching, their breath fogging in the cold. Hank built the fire with the lighter and the last of their dry tinder. The flame caught slowly, reluctantly, then spread to the branches Finn had stacked. Warmth spread in a small circle. Not enough, but something. He sat beside Alara and let her lean against him. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "She needs a hospital," Jasper said. "I know. We're still a day from the trailhead." Hank had no answer for that. He looked at the sky, at the snow falling through the branches, at the wolves waiting at the edge of the light. The alpha met his eyes. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. The other wolves followed, all except one, a young female with a pale coat and dark eyes. She stayed at the edge of the clearing, watching the fire, watching them. Hank did not understand why until she returned 10 minutes later with something in her mouth. A hare. Dead. Its neck broken. She dropped it at the edge of the firelight and backed away, sitting down in the snow with her head tilted, watching. Jasper stared. "She brought us food." Finn took the hare without a word. He skinned it with his knife, gutted it with movements that looked practiced, and set the meat to roast on a stick over the fire. The smell of cooking meat filled the clearing. Hank's stomach clenched. He had not realized how hungry he was until the smell hit him. They ate in silence. The meat was tough, gamey, barely cooked in the center. It was the best thing Hank had ever tasted. He watched Alara eat, watched her take each bite slowly, chewing with her eyes closed. Color was coming back to her face. When the meat was gone, Finn sat with his back against a tree, his hands empty, his eyes fixed on the fire. Jasper curled up beside Alara and fell asleep. Hank sat with the axe across his knees and watched the wolves. The young female had been joined by two others. They lay in the snow at the edge of the clearing, their heads on their paws, their eyes reflecting the firelight. The alpha was not among them. Hank waited. The snow fell. The fire burned down to embers. And in the hour before dawn, when the cold was deepest and the light was still only a suggestion on the horizon, the alpha came back. It walked to the edge of the clearing and stood there, looking at Hank. The wound on its leg was still raw, but it stood straight, its head high. It did not approach. It simply waited. Hank stood. He walked toward the alpha, stopping when he was close enough to see the steam of its breath in the cold. He looked into its eyes. Yellow, patient, ancient. The alpha lowered its head, just once. Then it turned and walked into the trees. Hank watched it go. He watched until the gray shape disappeared into the gray light, until the snow erased its tracks, until there was nothing left but the empty space where it had been. He went back to the fire. Alara was awake, watching him. "They're gone," she said. "Yes." She looked at his hands. The axe was still there, his knuckles white around the handle. She reached out and touched his wrist, her fingers cold against his skin. "You can let go now," she said. He looked at the axe. He looked at his hands. He did not remember picking it up again after the fire. He set it down on the ground beside him. "I'll build up the fire," he said. He did not sleep. He sat beside Alara and fed the flames until the sky turned gray and the snow stopped falling and the first birds began to call from the pines. The wolves did not return. The trail was there, waiting for them, a day's walk to the ranger station and the road and the world he had left behind. He was not sure he knew how to walk back into it. The rescue helicopter found them at noon on the second day. Hank heard it before he saw it, a distant thrum that grew into a roar that filled the valley. He was walking at the front of the group, Finn behind him, Jasper and Alara farther back where the trail widened. When the sound came, Finn stopped. His face did not change, but his eyes lifted to the sky for the first time since the tunnel. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, red and white, with markings Hank could not read. It hovered for a moment, tilting, and then began to descend toward the flat ground where the trail met the river. Alara laughed. It was a small sound, half a cough, but it was the first time any of them had laughed since the storm. Jasper took her arm and led her toward the landing zone, waving with his free hand. Finn followed at his own pace, his head down, his hands empty. Hank stood on the trail and watched the helicopter settle onto the stones. The paramedics came out first, 2 of them, moving fast with a stretcher and a bag of supplies. They went to Alara immediately, talking to her in voices that were calm and practiced. A man in a park ranger uniform came next, looking at the mountains behind them as if he expected something to follow. Hank stayed where he was. The ranger approached him. "Are you Hank Thorne?" "Yes." "Are there others?" "4 of us. 1 didn't make it." The ranger nodded. He wrote something in a small notebook. "We'll need a statement. The Weather Service picked up a distress signal from your last known coordinates 3 days ago. We've been searching since." Hank looked at the helicopter. They were loading Alara onto the stretcher now, wrapping her in blankets, starting in 4. Jasper climbed in after her, his face turned toward the window. Finn sat on a rock near the landing zone, a paramedic kneeling beside him, speaking to him in a low voice. Finn did not respond. "What happened up there?" the ranger asked. Hank considered the question. He thought of the storm, the wolves, the hollow where they had huddled together, the tracks in the snow, the tunnel, the blade, the tall man's pale eyes, open and still. "A storm destroyed our camp," he said. "We lost our gear. We walked down." The ranger waited. When Hank did not continue, he nodded again. "We'll get you all to the hospital in town. You can give a full statement there." He walked back toward the helicopter. Hank did not move. He stood on the trail with his hands at his sides, watching the paramedics work, watching the ranger talk into his radio, watching the sky where the clouds were breaking apart to show patches of blue. The mountain was behind him. He could feel it at his back, vast and cold and patient. He did not turn around. The hospital was a small building at the edge of a town Hank had never seen. They put him in a room with white walls and a window that faced the street. A nurse checked his hands, his feet, his face. She asked him questions about pain and dizziness and how long since he had eaten. He answered them with words that felt like they belonged to someone else. They brought him food, soup, bread, coffee. He ate because it was what people did. The taste was distant, as if he were watching himself from across the room. The police came first. 2 officers in dark jackets who sat across from him with a recorder and a notebook. They wanted to know about the storm, the tents, the lost gear. He told them what he had told the ranger. When they asked about the wounds on Alara's side and the cuts on Finn's face, he said they had fallen on the ice. The officers looked at each other. One of them wrote something down. "We'll need to interview the others separately," the first officer said. "Standard procedure." "Of course." They left. The room was quiet. Hank sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands. The knuckles were bruised, the skin raw. He had not noticed until now. He pressed his palm against his chest and tried to feel the rhythm of his heart. It was there, steady, but it was not the rhythm he remembered. Jasper came to see him that evening. He looked younger in the hospital light, his face soft, his eyes red. He sat in the chair by the window and did not speak for a long time. "They're saying it was an accident," Jasper finally said. "The storm, the equipment failure. That's what they're going to put in the report." "It was," Hank said. Jasper looked at him. You know it wasn't. Hank did not answer. He looked out the window at the street below, at the cars moving slowly through the slush, at the people walking with their heads down against the cold. Alara's going to be okay, Jasper said. The doctors say she'll need surgery, but she'll heal. Good. Finn won't talk. To anyone. He just sits there. Hank nodded. Jasper stood. He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the handle. What happened up there? The wolves. The people in the tunnel. That was real. I need you to tell me it was real. Hank looked at him. He saw the fear in the young man's face, the need for something solid to hold on to. He wanted to give it to him. He opened his mouth to say yes, to say it was real, to say all the things that would make it easier. It was real, he said. Jasper nodded once and left. Hank sat alone in the white room until the light outside faded and the street below became a line of headlights moving through the dark. A nurse came to check on him. A doctor came to ask more questions. They gave him a form to sign. He signed it without reading it. They released him 3 days later. Alara was still in the hospital. Jasper was staying with her. Finn had been moved to a facility in the city, one that specialized in trauma. Hank had not seen him since the helicopter. He took a bus to the city, then another bus to the street where his apartment was. He walked up the stairs with his pack over his shoulder and unlocked the door. The apartment was exactly as he had left it. The same dishes in the sink, the same mail on the table, the same silence in every room. He set his pack on the floor and stood in the middle of the living room, listening. No wind, no wolves, no heartbeat in the stone. He unpacked slowly. The map, the lighter, the rope, the clothes he had worn on the mountain, stiff with dirt and blood. He put them in a pile to wash. At the bottom of his pack, his hand closed around something he did not remember putting there. He pulled it out. A clump of gray fur. The alpha's fur. He knew it without question. It had worked its way into the lining of his pack somehow, tangled with the fabric. He held it to his face. The smell was faint now, but it was there. Wolf. Cold. The mountain. He stood in the middle of his apartment with the fur pressed against his palm and felt the hollow place in his chest open wider. He had thought the descent was the end. He had thought the trail would lead him back to this life, to these rooms, to the person he had been before. But that person was gone. He had left him in the hollow, under the stone, with the alpha's breath warm against his face. He put the fur in his jacket pocket. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. The buildings were tall. The lights were bright. The people moved in patterns he no longer understood. He would need to go back. Not tomorrow. Not soon. But someday. The mountain was waiting. He could feel it in the hollow of his chest, patient and ancient, and he knew now that the rhythm he had found there was the only one that would ever feel like home. 6 months passed before Hank went back to the mountains. He spent them in a cabin at the edge of a town he had never intended to stay in. The town was small, tucked into the foothills of a range different from the one where the storm had found them. Different rocks, different trees, different light. He had chosen it for that reason. He told himself he was done with the peaks that had taken Isla's life and Finn's voice and something from him that he still could not name. He worked as a guide for hunters who came in the fall and skiers who came in the winter. He knew the trails, knew the weather, knew when to push and when to turn back. The people who hired him said he was quiet. They said he knew the mountains better than anyone they had met. They did not ask where he had learned. He did not tell them. Alara came to visit once. She drove up from the city in a car that looked new, her hair longer, her face fuller than it had been on the mountain. The scar on her side had healed into a pale line she did not talk about. They sat on the porch of the cabin and watched the sun set behind the peaks. You could come back, she said. There are jobs, people who want to hear what happened. No one wants to hear what happened. I want to hear it. He looked at her. She was watching him with the same steady gaze she had used on the mountain, the one that saw through the answers he gave to the questions he did not. I don't talk about it, he said. I know. She left the next morning. He stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down the gravel road, and he felt the hollow in his chest open just enough to let the cold in. Then he went inside and packed his gear. He did not plan the return. It came like the weather came, slowly, then all at once. A client canceled. A storm cleared. He looked at the map on his wall, at the contour lines he had traced 100 times, and he knew it was time. He drove for 2 days. The roads grew narrower, the town smaller, the mountains larger. He stopped at the last gas station before the trailhead and filled his tank and his pack. The man behind the counter looked at him with the flat curiosity of someone who had seen too many people go into the wilderness and not enough come back. You going up alone? Yes. Winter's coming early. They're saying snow by the end of the week. Hank paid for his gas. I won't be that long. He drove to the trailhead and parked where the plows stopped. The gate was closed for the season, a chain across the road with a sign that said the area was unmaintained and travel was not advised. He stepped over the chain and walked. The trail was familiar even though he had never taken it before. The slope was gentle at first, then steeper, the trees thinning as the altitude increased. He walked at the pace he had learned on the mountain, steady, patient, conserving energy. His pack was lighter than it had been on the expedition. He carried only what he needed: food for 3 days, a tent, a sleeping bag, the axe, the lighter, the map. He camped that night below the tree line. The fire was small, the stars bright. He sat with his back against a pine and listened to the sounds of the forest. Owls, wind, the distant crack of ice shifting on the slopes above. He did not sleep much. He had not slept much in 6 months. In the morning, he climbed higher. The tree line came and went. The snow began in patches, then in sheets, then in a white blanket that covered everything. He followed the ridge the way the Alpha had shown him, trusting the shape of the land rather than the lines on the map. The air grew thin. His lungs burned. He welcomed the burn. He found the hollow in the afternoon of the second day. It was not the same hollow. The rock was different, the shape different, the exposure to the wind different. But it was a hollow, a place where the stone curved inward, where the snow did not drift as deep, where something could wait out a storm. He set his pack down and sat with his back to the rock. He waited. The light began to fade. The temperature dropped. He pulled his jacket tighter and watched the ridge above him, where the shadows were gathering in the folds of the mountain. They came at dusk. 3 of them, moving along the ridge with the fluid grace he remembered. Their fur was thick, their breath misting in the cold. They stopped at the edge of the hollow and looked down at him. He did not move. He did not reach for the axe. The largest of them stepped forward. It was not the Alpha. The ears were different, the shape of the muzzle different. But it moved with the same patience, the same ancient certainty. It looked at Hank with yellow eyes that held no fear and no aggression, only recognition. He sat in the hollow and let the wolf look at him. He let the cold seep into his bones and the silence fill his ears. He let the rhythm of his own breathing slow until it matched something older than he was. The wolf lay down at the edge of the hollow. The others followed. They did not come closer. They did not need to. They were there, and he was there, and the mountain was there, and that was enough. He built a small fire when the dark was complete. The flames were small, contained, just enough to push the cold back a few feet. The wolves watched from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the light. He ate a portion of his food and offered none to them. They did not expect it. He thought of the night in the hollow, the night of the storm. He thought of the Alpha's heartbeat against his ribs, the warmth of its body pressed against his side. He thought of the terror and the peace and the strange, quiet understanding that had passed between them without words. He thought of the man he had been before that night, the man who had climbed the mountain to escape a life he no longer wanted. That man was gone. He had died somewhere in the pass, or in the tunnel, or on the ridge when he had chosen the wolves over his own kind. What remained was something else, something that had learned to be still, something that had learned to wait. The fire burned down to embers. The wolves did not move. Hank sat with his back against the rock and watched the stars wheel overhead. He did not know how long he stayed there. Time moved differently in the hollow. It was measured not in hours but in breaths, in the slow cycle of light and dark, in the patience of stone. In the hour before dawn, when the cold was deepest and the wolves had gone one by one into the dark, he heard it. A howl, low and long, rising from somewhere deeper in the mountains. It was not a call. It was not a warning. It was simply a sound, old as the rock, old as the cold, old as the hollow places in the human heart that no city could fill. He listened until the sound faded. Then he gathered his pack, stamped out the last embers of the fire, and began the walk down. He did not look back. He did not need to. The mountain was in him now, in the rhythm of his breathing, in the patience of his hands, in the hollow place that had stopped being empty and started being something else. He would go back to the cabin, to the town, to the life he had built out of the ruins of the old one. He would guide hunters and skiers. He would watch the sun set behind the peaks. He would wait. And when the time came, he would return to the hollow. The wolves would be there. The mountain would be there. And he would sit with his back against the stone and let the cold and the silence fill him, and he would be warm. That was enough.